Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
It is interesting listening to members opposite, because as various colleagues on this side of the House have pointed out, it is an extraordinary fiscal fantasy land that the opposition live in. Having taken net core Crown debt from $57 billion, listen up, this is your record, $57 billion to $175 billion in just 5 years, their solution is borrow more, spend more and tax more. It's like the last 5, 6, 7 years just never happened. It is quite extraordinary. It's sort of like, how do you come down here to the House, having stuffed the economy, having bequeathed to the incoming government the haifu and the pre-election economic and fiscal update and the haifu which we're now talking about in this snap debate, and say with a straight face, don't worry, we've got the answer, says Deborah Russell and Barbara Edmonds and all of the also-rans on the other side. Don't worry about it, we've got the answer. The answer's more debt. The answer's more spending and more tax. It's like the last 6 years never happened. It is truly an extraordinary fiscal fantasy land that they live in. The operating balance was in deficit for 5 years, and now Barbara Edmonds stands up and says, Nicola Willis is running deficits. Yep, we are running deficits, and we're determined to get back to surplus as quickly as we can. And Barbara Edmonds stands up and says, well, the government's borrowing more. The government's in debt. The government's borrowing more. Yep, we are. Because the last government left us with this extraordinary spending track that you cannot turn around in one budget alone. And Barbara Edmonds says crazy things like, you haven't actually heard what I said, but that I agree with you. She does. She says crazy things like debt's not the problem. Her entire question time today to Nicola Willis was to ask a series of questions about increases in debt, after having said earlier in the year, debt's not a problem. Well, which is it? Is debt a problem that the government can be lashed for, or is debt something that we don't need to worry about? It's just, the Labour Party need to work out what their best line of attack on the government is. Is it that we are borrowing too much, or is it that we are not borrowing enough? They don't have their story straight. Well, this government's got its story straight. This government's story is the economic and fiscal reality that we inherited, which is that years and years of high government spending, much of it wasteful, has driven government spending to record levels such that we ran operating deficits for 5 of the last 6 years. Debt blew out to 42% of GDP, and we've got to get the country and the government books back on track. And that's not an easy task. And the haifu that we are talking about in this special debate makes that really clear. It was interesting when Barbara Edmonds led off the debate, because I thought we were going to be talking about haifu, but actually we spent 90 seconds with a sob story. It was sort of like a Year 10 debating speech that somehow made its way into Parliament. It was quite an extraordinary series of events. So we've got our story straight, which is that at the end of the day, what matters? Fiscal discipline matters. Because, yep, you can keep spending and laying it on the credit card bill, but guess what? Eventually, the people who lent you money come calling, and you have to show a credible path back to surplus. And that is what this government is focused on. That involves tough decisions. And it's really easy in opposition, I've been there, it's really easy in opposition to stand up and say things like, we will rebuild New Dunedin Hospital. Okay, well, to do that, you actually need to know how much it costs. The opposition left us a project with New Dunedin Hospital that started life as $1.2 billion and ended up on the thick end of $3 billion. It's a bit like with IREX. IREX being another paradigmatic example. IREX sounded great when it was first posited. 2 new ferries for $700 million, except they forgot about the $3 billion on top of that to actually house the ferries. So government involves tough decisions. And until the Labour Party opposition get their head around the fact that there is not a magic money tree at the end of the garden they will continue to fail. And we are getting this government's books back on track.